welcome. I'm Chris O'Connor of the Heart Failure Collaboratory, and we're here with Heart of the Matter podcast to discuss site-based research. What are the problems? What are the challenges? Is site-based research broken in the United States? We had a wonderful collaboratory discussion just recently, and we're here joined by our esteemed panel. I want to have them introduce themselves. We'll start with Dr. Melvin Echols.
I'm Melvin Echols. I am the Chief Health Equity Officer for the American College of Cardiology, as well as the heart failure general cardiologist and Associate Professor of Medicine at Marat School of Medicine.
Thank you, Melvin. And you didn't say that you were once upon a time my fellow.
Yes.
Sumeet Mitter. Still Dr. Mitter?
Yeah, hi. Thank you. I'm Sumeet Mitter. I am the Director of Site-Based Research and the Director of the Infiltrated and Restrictive Cardiomyopathy Program at Nova Shar Heart and Vascular, and also an Assistant Professor of Medical Education for the University of Virginia.
Thank you. Marat Fudim?
Hi, I'm Marat Fudim. I'm a heart failure cardiologist at Duke University. I'm also leading our site-based research efforts at the Duke Heart Center.
Thank you. Maria Rosa, without introductions needed.
Maria Rosa Costanzo, heart failure cardiologist at the Midwest Cardiovascular Institute, and very passionate about doing something about the problem.
Anu?
Yeah, Anu Lala. I'm at the Mount Sinai Fuster Heart Hospital. I also direct our site-based research efforts here, and I'm one of the co-editors-in-chief of the Journal of Cardiac Failure.
And Dalane.
Dalane Kitzman. I'm a cardiologist at Wake Forest University School of Medicine in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with a focus on aging, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, exercise physiology, and clinical trials. I've helped develop, lead, and co-lead quite a number of site-based trials.
Dalane, you made some very important, provocative statements at the Collaboratory think tank, but I want you to sort of frame the problem as you see it in the United States and talk about some of the positive solutions that you've come up with.
Well, the problem is that recruitment tends to be slow for many heart failure trials, usually recruitment rates that are less than half of what was anticipated. And then one loses momentum and enthusiasm. There's large site turnover, demoralization. One of the problems structurally is that there's a lot of diffuseness where trials come from. There's a variety of funding sources. They all have nuances. Regulatory burden increases. It seems like it doubles every couple of years. Something that is a challenge at sites is that many academic institutions that previously encouraged so-called residuals now view them as a potential compliance risk. And so that the ability to bridge from one study to the other becomes very, very difficult. But there are some things that are bright lights on the horizon. We've got robust medical records and easily plug-in apps that allow very powerful searching with just natural language, as well as we've got a family of actual heart failure specific ICD-9 codes and a lot of related codes that help us find heart failure patients that haven't yet been identified because they're called fluid overload or hypertensive pulmonary edema or other things that are frankly heart failure, but initially treated otherwise. And these allow us to identify patients. We've got better ways to reach out to them. It used to be that you try to recruit them from your clinic, and that was a limiting step. Which doctor has enough clinic time and a large enough panel, but also has protected time to do meaningful clinical research? They're sort of incompatible. Now we can identify patients, send letters to identify the program, have follow-up calls. We can meet them in the clinics knowing that they're enriched. We can get on Epic and send them a chat message. And engage them directly. So there are a number of ways. One of the things that hasn't changed is it's really important for investigators to help engage the patient and help them see the legacy that they're about to build and to bring out the altruism in individuals. You have the potential to be, you can be involved in an effort, a nationwide effort to identify a new treatment for your condition that affects 3 million persons a year. Think of how exciting that is. We need to share the dream and the excitement. I'll say, the study was approved by a panel of 20 scientists in the federal government, and we received funding, but nothing happens until someone like you says yes, that you'll participate. So those are some of the tools that we have that are really powerful and that we can leverage in order to help work around some of the barriers.
Gosh, Dalane, I'll sign up for your trial right now. Yeah, that was great. Anu, tell us a little bit more why you think it's broken in the United States. Why is site-based research broken?
Yeah, I mean, I think the phrase broken is strong. You know me as like an eternal optimist, but I think it's justified. We are consistently seeing delays, variable quality, limited diversity of enrolled populations, burnout of site teams. I think when we talk about site-based research in the US, we often assume that the infrastructure and the incentives and the operational models are appropriate or adequate. But in reality, they are variable and they are frayed. And I think that there's major sort of structural challenges that exist. They're not just superficial inefficiencies. I think from my perspective as both a clinician and as a clinical trialist, I think there's a real mismatch between what trial protocols demand and then what frontline sites are pragmatically able to deliver. And that gap seems to be widening. I really love what you just said, Dr. Kitzman, because I do think that we need to bring back some of the personalization of participating in clinical trials, the passion, the altruism, not only just to add to your point on the part of the patient, but also to invigorate our research teams. I just ironically met with our research team before doing this podcast, and I went over all the trials that we have participated in thus far, when and how they were presented, what the outcomes of those trials were, and then all the trials that we're currently enrolling in, and spoke to them as to the importance of what they were doing as a clinical research team. So I think that that altruism point is so crucial and important, and it applies not only to our patients, but also to motivate and inspire the research teams that are carrying out the conduct of those trials. And so I will have many different opportunities, I think, to share a number of different ideas. But one main thing that I think is what I mentioned earlier is this incredible sense of variability across sites in terms of what they're able to do, in terms of what their infrastructure is, in terms of what the expectations are. And I think that is what needs to, that gap between what the trial expects and what individual sites are supposed to deliver needs to be bridged and also needs to be individualized. So looking forward to what others have to say as well.
Yeah, no, terrific comments. And, we've seen the average site recruitment in the U.S. go from 0.8 patients per site per month in the late 80s to 0.4. That's sort of the aggregate. That's a HFC project that's ongoing. But Maria Rosa, you ran a very successful site-based research program, and tell us what your thoughts are on why it's broken and what we can do.
Interestingly, I have thought about this very much lately, and because I encountered younger colleagues that did not seem to be interested in doing research, and I reflected on what was different from my upbringing and their upbringing. And I think it really starts with medical school, where you should be told and convinced that you cannot be a doctor without being willing to do research. That research is just as important as your clinical duties, because you need to be someone that advances science throughout your career. And I don't think the importance of research is really convincingly to medical students. In addition to that, given the size of the trials that we must conduct, while I respect and I believe that research at academic institutions is absolutely essential, we are never going to enroll sufficient numbers of patients unless we involve groups that are in private practice. And in private practice, there are so many disincentives to do research that if we do not remove those disincentives, you can have all the ICD codes you want, which are very useful. You can have all the applications and natural language initiatives to identify patients. But if you don't have champions that believe in what they're doing, I don't think it's going to happen.
Really important concepts there about early education exposure. The Collaboratory is inviting students after undergraduate education before medical school to be service interns, pre-graduate interns. And we've gotten 4 now off the ground, but I bet they're going to be really good site-based research investigators in the future. But it's a long process. Marat?
You know, a lot of good points already made. I would say that if the question is what are the barriers, or how do we fix site-based research, I would say that it's on one side incentives, which I haven't heard as much about. I think that clinicians not incentivized to do research in a busy and ever busier getting clinical schedule to carve out time to do research is often unprotected. Research work is often unrewarded if you do that on your own time. That hurts as well. Pipeline problem has been brought up. I mean, Dr. Maria Rosa Costanzo sort of spoke to that. If you don't have people interested in research, then they will not go the extra mile to do the research. And then, Dr. Kitzman already mentioned the regulatory burdens. I actually agree with the statement. Every few years, the regulatory burdens double. And I think research to some degree has gotten less fun, even in my lifetime as an investigator over the last 10, 12 years, where regulatory burden has gotten higher. The same work I could have done 10, 12 years ago with 2 resources and 2 middlemen and middlewomen. Now it's 4 middlemen and women. And now I need twice the resources. The startup costs have doubled and tripled. Now, it is not that there's one person that is trying to obstruct or one administrator putting bricks on it. It's been really more of a slow, concerted effort from all directions to make research ironclad and protect against bad actors and to guarantee good quality. But the downside of that is that young investigators, and that's true for us, particularly young investigators, have been disincentivized and discouraged to do investigator-initiated study, which often is what gets them started. And you will know how I started my career at my institution, where I've done a lot of early first-in-human studies. Some of those things are just no longer possible unless you have big industry supporting you to do these things, and extra years in the pocket to accomplish them.
It's changing times, and there's increasing pressure on the site-based research investigator. Melvin, not only is the recruitment rates low, but the representative populations that we're recruiting into clinical trials still asymmetric. Comment on both those concepts.
So I think that, everyone has made obviously great points, but, I think that each person has kind of slowly made a point that every part of the clinical trials kind of workflow process is really fragmented. And there are a lot of stakeholders that in this landscape now have, different desires and different outcomes. Obviously, you have the sponsors and the patients, but you also have the, PIs, you have the coordinators, who, for all intents and purposes, really are looking for an actualized career development, professional development, phase of their own. And so everyone in the process has sort of a need. And unfortunately, the needs for every single entity sometimes kind of preclude diversity and preclude sort of the communication and the culturally competent conversations that you need to have with patients to make people feel comfortable that they're safe in a clinical trial. This is kind of where I sit all day long. And one of the things that I always tell patients is that the number one job that I have as a site PI is to make sure that you are safe in this trial, above and beyond sort of outcomes and metrics. That is my number one job. And so when you're looking at a patient and talking to them in the face and letting them know that even through possible complications, even through possible, sort of risks that the patient may or may not assume, you as a site PI are sort of that pillar for the patient to make sure that they feel comfortable that you're supporting them. And I think that in doing that, oftentimes it becomes not a race thing, not a disparity thing. It's just a humanity thing. And at the end of the day, if you're doing the right thing for patients, people will feel it.
Really well said. Thank you, Melvin. And Melvin, as part of when he was on the Duke team, set up a whole program in Lumberton, North Carolina, which really was a successful outreach site-based research unit that enrolled a really diverse group of patients. So thank you, Melvin, for your comments. Dr. Mitter, you get the last of the first round words, and then we're going to ask people some specific questions.
Thank you. I think, and I don't want to use the word compete, but I think we're just, and some people have alluded to this, that there's just a pull in different philosophies, at least in the hospital-based systems that are trying to conduct clinical research. At one hand, an individual investigator, whether they're early or late career, want to do things for public good and in the interest of their patients, whether it's a very common disease or a rare disease. But time is a commodity that's is not always there, and we're pulled in different directions, and we report to different bosses. And there's different philosophies even within the hospital system from an administrator level, like, well, you have productivity here that you need to produce, but somehow balance that with this public health good or research in the interest of these patients. And how that happens at the end, the margin gets smaller, and what you're able to do in terms of clinical research and that time allocated for it gets smaller. And we're going to be facing more and more of that with what's going on the Hill with our budgets for hospitals. And so I think a lot of physicians, whether early or late, struggle with that. How do you accomplish both? And along with that, I think, we alluded to the regulatory component becoming increasingly burdensome. I think, one of the things that many directors of research have to learn on the fly is even balancing budgets and having training, and how do you keep an operation afloat, and how do you engage with the patients and sustain enrollment. These are all skills you develop over time, but it's almost as if we need a boot camp and an ongoing boot camp for individuals engaged in clinical research to understand the shifting landscape and the philosophies that arise together in our current healthcare system, whether it's hospital-based or private practice, so that we can ultimately be successful and learn from each other.
Very good. Well, we're going to go around the table now, and you're going to have to communicate to our audience one big idea for correcting course for success. And I'll give you a second or so while I give you mine. And that was the idea of the research value unit, as opposed to the typical RVU. And that was giving credit. We piloted this at Inova. We haven't really got it fully embraced at this point. We need to dust it off and try it again. But it's really to give the time credit for investigators who are working in site-based research. But Dalane, what's the big idea that you have to correct course?
I think the pipeline is important. We need to figure a way to keep the stream of site-based investigators going. And so I guess it would be this, and that is mentoring. When you get to our stage, you begin realizing that there's nobody in line behind you, and you begin recalling how important my mentors at Duke, Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, elsewhere here were in my formative years, and then you want to give back, which is good. But you really do that on the margin, and you do that on unscheduled time. And other than sometimes, awards for successful mentoring, there's nothing else. So I think institutions and our society need to envision deliberately identifying individuals who are interested and who have the talent in order to develop, and then link them up with mentors and incentivize the mentors. That's sort of tricky because usually the mentors are already perceived as the haves. I've got decent resources, but there needs to be, if it's release time or further recognition, we need a pipeline. I am really worried that as I look around me, who is going to be the next Dalane Kitzman, the next Marat, the next Chris O'Connor? The pipeline is exceedingly thin.
So pipeline, critical. Anu?
I think the single most impactful fix centers around centralization and standardization. So we need master IRBs, universal contracts, shared regulatory platforms to reduce the tremendous amount of redundancy with trial startup so that sites can be freed up to focus on patient engagement and data quality. When we remove some of this tedious stuff that needs to get done by virtue of it being standardized, centralized, and harmonized across various sites, I think that can actually be possible.
Those are terrific suggestions. Maria Rosa.
Are we allowed to express what our dreams are?
Yes. Heart of the matter allows dreams.
Okay, so my dream is for Medicare to eliminate all punishments, and I'm referring specifically to the heart failure readmission reduction program, for example. And instead of using the stick, use a carrot to reward the sites that enroll Medicare patients into clinical trials.
Now that is big and bold. And that's a wonderful dream. Thank you. Marat?
Not to repeat what others have said, I'll pivot a little bit. I think one of the key things we can do that seems like a small thing, but has a big impact on, for example, the pipeline problem is the, celebrating the small wins and celebrating the investigators. Often site-based research is sort of it's in the background. It's not acknowledged. One thing that I spearhead in my institution is actually to highlight patients that get enrolled and the role that patient enrollment does in their clinical care. We often think of site-based research as this side thing, but it's actually directly involved in patient care and delivery of novel therapies, improvement of quality of life, and beyond. And I think celebrating those wins, celebrating the investigators, celebrating the patients, and celebrating the process is something that's just not sufficiently done, and highlighting, how it impacts individual lives. I think those are the small things we can do, but then those people that feel invisible now feel like they're contributing to the bigger mission, and then, work harder the next day, even if it's maybe not acknowledged otherwise.
Great comments. It's harder to go last on this question because a lot of good comments have been made. Melvin,
Not
you're
at all.
next.
Great comments. But I think that I definitely agree with Dr. Kitzman in terms of the upstream mentorship. That's very important. But I'm actually actualizing that right now with residents in our internal medicine residency training program. So as part of the one of the AHA SFRA and clinical trial diversity initiatives, we've had a trial for 4 years that we've kind of gotten off the ground. That's a hypertension trial, but it actually has a stepwise screening sort of phase in it where we randomize 80 residents, 80 internal medicine residents to a resident-led protocol where about 13 of them are fully responsible for checking their continuity clinics every week and enrolling patients, consenting patients, hooking them up for the monitors versus a coordinator, the traditional methods versus Deep Six, which is an AI assisted technology that allows you to kind of, sort of screen the entire EHR. And so, that's sort of the first phase of this trial. And we're trying to figure out, which screening modality actually is more effective. Residents are actually really an important piece here. And I think that we really should try to engage them and actually build them out. They actually are enrolling more and actually more efficiently than any other arm. And so I do think that we need to make some actionable interventions to bring in the fold the young investigators, because these will be our site PIs one day.
And I love the fact that you're testing different models. That is fantastic. And that's what I would expect of you, Melvin. Dr. Mitter, you get the last word.
I think a lot of us alluded to this in some shape, but to build on that, especially with the research value unit that we're trying to resuscitate in some ways at ANOVA, or bring back, is that there has to be some type of like trialist pathway for an institution. So institutions understand the value of this. And that's how you create a steady stream of a pipeline. It's hard to take, say, someone who's working in critical care, say, let me pick up one trial and see if I'm just going to do amazing with it right away. And then this will, cause a shift in my career. Those are competing philosophies there at the get-go. And then it's hard to actually just develop a skill set in trials and keep arguing for that skill set to be built upon. I mean, it almost seems like we need pathways for a number of individuals who will want to focus on trials and bring that to the institution and the greater good of the institution so that they can be experts in this craft and build upon that infrastructure. And it sounds like those are some of the things that Dr. Echols is trying to do with residents and create that passion for it. But we need to make sure that is able to continue on when people are actually in employment. So along with the mentorship and starting early, whether it's in residency or later on with junior faculty, institutions have to create a pathway for these trialists to exist and build upon those skills.
Very good. Well, you all have come up with all the solutions. And I remind you that this dialogue doesn't end. The Heart Failure Collaboratory, in partnership with the American Heart Association, actually provides national recognition of site-based researchers and coordinators with awards. And we'll have that award ceremony again with a discussion. This discussion will continue. So I just want to thank all our panelists today. I want to thank our audience for listening in to Heart of the Matter from the Heart Failure Collaboratory. And until next time, keep trying to recruit patients into clinical trials and help us solve this difficult problem. Thank you.